Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for waiting. And I would like to welcome all of you, the distinguished speakers, moderator, professionals, academics, students, and participants joining us from across Sri Lanka. So, on behalf of the organizing committee of the national webinar series titled Climate Smart Sri Lanka, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you with the webinar 2 today. And we successfully concluded our first webinar last night with the participation of over 300 participants from across the country. And also, there were two profound experts who joined with us yesterday. And today, as well, we are going to witness another insightful discussion. So, talking about this webinar series, this is organized by Sri Lanka Technological Campus under the guidance of the Vice Chancellor, Professor Chandrika Wijewardane, in collaboration with the Institute of Environmental Professionals Sri Lanka. And as a responsible higher education institute recognized by the Ministry of Education, and as a member of Sri Lanka Association of Non-State Higher Education Institutes and the Association of Commonwealth Universities, we at SLTC are constantly committed towards advancing climate resilience and thereby promoting sustainable development. The IEPSL, which is the joint strategic partner of this initiative, the Institute of Environmental Professionals Sri Lanka, is an equally recognized body who is upholding the professional standards with its expertise and the services for the benefit of the country and the wider public. And also, it is a recognized professional body for practicing environmental professionals in Sri Lanka. So, this webinar series was developed in response to the growing impacts of climate induced disasters in Sri Lanka and also with the aim of transforming awareness into action through evidence based discussions, professional insights, and practical strategies for preparedness. As we are here to listen to an insightful webinar today, and the session is going to be on rebuilding the economy, short term relief, and long term resilience after a disaster. So, from this webinar today, we will be exploring how Sri Lanka can recover from the disasters effectively while building long term economic and social resilience. So, prior to starting the session, I would like to keep the participants updated on few ground rules. I would like to respectfully request all of you to keep your microphones muted at all times to ensure a smooth flow of the webinar. And also, we will be opening up a separate space for Q&A after each guest talk. And please use the Q&A forum and the chat forum here to raise your concerns, and the moderator will duly address those questions during the Q&A. And this webinar will also be recorded for educational purposes and will be streamlined through our social media platforms for awareness sessions. And also, in the end of this webinar, we will be displaying a feedback form for you all to scan the QR code to raise your feedback. And also, based on your feedback, we will be issuing the certificates duly as promised for you within the upcoming week. So please stay updated and please stay with us at the end of the webinar. We will be distributing you the feedback form where you will be able to fill it. And with that, we can now move on to the session today. And for that, we are privileged to have two experts in the field. And we would like to welcome Mr. Dhananath Fernando, the CEO of Advocata Institute, and Dr. W.A. Wijewardane, who is a former Deputy Governor of Central Bank. And also to guide this important discussion, we are pleased to have Mr. Manjula de Silva, who is a former Secretary General and a CEO of Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, who is serving as our moderator for the session today. So I would formally hand over the session to Mr. Manjula de Silva after this formal introduction. Mr. Manjula de Silva holds a BA Honours First Class degree in Economics from the University of Colombo and an MBA from London Business School, UK. He is also an FCMA and Chartered Global Management Accountant. Further, he has pursued executive education at INSEAD Business School, France, and Harvard Business School, USA. He functioned as a Secretary General and CEO of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce from February 2020 to January 2023. Prior to that, he has held many other leadership positions in both public and private sectors, including the post of Chairman at National Insurance Trust Fund, Director General at Public Enterprises Reform Commission, and Managing Director at HNB Assurance PLC. He also served as a commission member of the Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka, board member of the Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission, and a consultant to the Ministry of Public Enterprise Development. With that introduction, now I would like to hand over the session to Mr. Manjula de Silva, who is the moderator of today, to drive the discussion today on rebuilding the economy, short-term relief, and long-term resilience after a disaster. Mr. Manjula de Silva, the forum is now open for you.
Thanks, Umayangana. Good evening and welcome to the second webinar in the national webinar series titled Climate Smart Sri Lanka, conducted by SLTC in collaboration with IEPSL. So today's topic is rebuilding the economy, short-term relief and long-term resilience after a disaster. We have two eminent speakers to address this topic, followed by a Q&A session with both of them. Now, talking about the disaster itself, the Ditwa cyclone was one of the worst natural disasters we have experienced in recent times in Sri Lanka, ranking alongside the 2004 tsunami and the major floods we experienced in 2016 and 2017. According to the UNDP, 2.3 million people, so that's over 10% of our population, were affected to different degrees. 1.1 million hectares of land, which is close to about 20% of the land mass in this country, got flooded. And we also had 1,200 landslides, which I believe was also a record. Over 700,000 buildings have been affected, over 16,000 kilometers of roads, more than 480 bridges, and over 278 kilometers of railways have been damaged. So from these numbers, you can get a sense of the destruction caused by Ditwa. The World Bank has estimated the financial impact at $4.1 billion US, which is equal to about 4% of the GDP. However, when it comes to the impact of the disaster on the economy overall, we hear two different views. One view, which I would say is the dominant view among economists, is that the Sri Lankan economy was on a much stronger footing at the time of the disaster relative to the past, and hence the economy will be able to withstand this shock and stay on the course to economic recovery. The other view is that the impact of this disaster is so severe, and hence the economic recovery process can get derailed unless some drastic measures are taken, such as renegotiating the debt restructuring program. So we have different views coming from different parties. So let's hear from our two highly regarded speakers to see where they stand on this matter, and also take up further questions during the Q&A stage. So let me now introduce our first speaker, Mr. Dhananath Fernando. He is the CEO and one of the founding members of Advocata Institute, a leading economic policy think tank, recognized globally for policy impact. An Eisenhower scholar, he is a prominent commentator on Sri Lanka's economy and an award-winning policy advocate. He is a regular speaker at seminars, conferences, talk shows, and webinars on economic policy and related subjects. If you haven't heard him before, you haven't been following economic developments in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Dhananath.
Thank you very much, Manjula, and thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to join this conversation. In fact, when I'm joining the Zoom session, my memory went back to the COVID time, because when I look at the number of participants, about 200 participants on a webinar at this time of the day was basically happened during COVID time and a little bit afterwards. And now it's a quite a timely topic about the climate smart Sri Lanka and what we need to do. So I'm pretty much delighted, and it took my memory back again on how the crisis times were when we had COVID. But having said that, things have now changed. We have passed that COVID phase, and now we are in a different, completely sort of a new, I would say, a new context. But however, pretty much the fundamentals remains the same. Even in fact, I recall when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was in the front seat after with the COVID crisis, he made a very profound statement. He said it's a healthcare crisis, but we should not allow it to extend for an economic crisis. I think in that front he was right, but the challenge was analysis was right, but whether the solutions which was proposed to stop an economic crisis is where we have to give the focus. In the same way, now we have hit with Ditwa last year. At the same time, now we have to think about whether we are pretty much our analysis is right. I think we have, as Manjula mentioned, and I'm sure we all aware, there have been multiple analysis being done by UNDP, ILO, World Bank. I think numbers are quite, everyone quite aware of the damage that has happened, quite unfortunate. But the challenge is whether our solutions and the prescription that we are going to overcome this is right or like appropriate solutions is what do we have. So with that, I will try to share my slide deck to begin with. Okay, there's some. Can you see my screen by any chance? No? Is it visible? I hope not.
No, not yet.
Okay. Let me check. Okay. Right. Is it better? No, okay. Let me check. Okay. Now it should be visible, I hope.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So basically what happened was, if you look at what I have done is basically plotted and taken the data on couple of key areas of how the rainfall has basically over the last year. And as you can clearly see, areas like Badulla and even areas like, yes, Badulla is pretty much, the rainfall is compared to 2024, it's completely abnormal. But again, at the same time, if you look at other cities like Galle, even to that extent, Kurunegala, Colombo, those areas were not, in terms of the rainfall, the effect was quite less. What I'm trying to bring out is the Ditwa, as we know, the impact was not across the country. There were definitely selected areas, and fortunately or unfortunately, it is not to the economic center, which is Colombo, and also the tourist stretch, which is Galle and the down south. And as we all know, the Uva province is one of the poorest districts in Sri Lanka. So overall, the poorest of the poor had got the worst impact through this crisis. As a result, the economic, of course, there was a massive damage to the economy, but things could have been worse if the areas of impact were different. So that's about the areas that has affected. And as you can see, even if you look at the intensity of the rainfall, the area like the districts like Badulla and Vaunia are quite heavily impacted compared to areas like Galle, Colombo, and Kurunegala. So the point that I'm trying to come to is basically, even if you look at the Colombo district, where the main damage came from, like areas like Katunayaka and basically the BOI zones in Gampa, even in the Western province. So that is basically where the impact was basically focused on. So Then the challenge was, when this sort of a crisis takes place, first of all, if our foundation on the fundamentals are poor, that has a massive impact. We saw the same thing happen over and over again. If you go back in 2015, there was this bond scam. 2016, there was again there was a flood, and 2017 there was a drought. 2018 there was a constitutional crisis. Two prime ministers were claiming for the same seat. 2019, there was Easter attack. 2020-21, there was COVID. 2022, there was economic crisis. And then we had a short recovery period for 2023 and 24, and pretty much the first 11 months of 2025. So we had about 3 years slow recovery, and then again this happened. So the point is, Sri Lanka has been quite open for a lot of economic shocks and crises, and given our fundamentals are weak, even it could be any type of a crisis. It could be a healthcare crisis, it could be a political crisis, anything basically that can impact all over. However, in this case, as you can see, what I have plotted is the impact on the food prices, because if you recall, just after like the first 2 days, because of the supply chains were interrupted, the prices went up, especially on the food items, because that is what is affecting the poorest of the poor. But again, it came down, and commending to the government, they did not impose price controls, but also they, I think, took quite fast action on establishing the connectivity, which again reconnected the supply chain, and as a result, the food prices came down, while when you compare it with November, while there's slightly like towards the higher side on certain selected food categories like beans or carrots, at the same time, not some other food items were affected at the same percentage. So overall, this time it was a bad crisis, but I think while our fundamentals were weak, after the recovery, there was some institutional framework actually, in my view, prevailed us from heading towards a greater disaster, is my view. Because we had achieved a stronger primary balance. In simpler terms, we had better savings. Of course, it came at a cost of higher taxes, and at the same time of cutting down capital expenditure. But however, we had some buffers that we were able to spend. Of course, it's a spending process is going on, but we were at a better wicket than we were before. So that is what you see, some level of stability compared to kind of previous crises that we went through. And if you look at the fiscal side of it, as you can see, we allocated additional 500 billion for this year's budget, and again 50 billion at the immediate aftermath of the crisis. And we were able to do it because our fundamentals were somewhat all right. And in my view, those fundamentals came with about 4 to 5 key reforms that we did after the economic crisis. First is, to an extent, the independence of the central bank. That's, I would say, quite an instrumental reform. Of course, it's not a perfect solution. The existing framework is not perfect, but it is somewhat better than it was before. And at the same time, we have the Public Debt Management Act and the Public Debt Management Office. That's quite important for us. And the third one is also the fuel price formula. And the fourth one is also the Public Fiscal Management Act. That's also quite instrumental for our stability. So all these came also with, we have been in an IMF program after the economic crisis. So this DITWA we have to look at in that context, overall context, that we have been going back on multiple shocks, starting from 2015, even way before. And then there was a recovery period. And after that recovery period is where we faced this crisis with some level of institutional reforms, which paid some level of dividend, that where we were able to absorb this crisis. But interestingly, while the numbers were like quite staggering, like 4.1 billion losses, financial loss from World Bank, and even ILO went to the extent of mentioning it's a 16 billion US dollar economic loss. What I'm showing to you is the total electricity generation from November 22nd to pretty much January 17th. As you can see, after the dip in November 28, 29, the electricity generation cycle has basically caught up. Why the electricity cycle graph? Because electricity generation is also an indication of the economic activity. It's a reasonable proxy. So that means just after the, first few days, the electricity generation is back to normal. So that means the economic activity has recovered quite faster, in my view, given while we had quite a tough shock between 2028 to 30th of November. And even if you look at the night peak, as you can see, like during the Christmas time, it's pretty much like a party. Even where we had quite a dip in the during the few days of the crisis, again it recovered quite faster. So while I think there are initial estimations of from the World Bank, which is very useful, I think the recovery, in my view, is rather than the recovery, I think the people moving back to with resilience and going back to the economic activity is, I would say, quite noticeable in the aftermath. But it doesn't mean that people were not affected. Of course, the poorest of the poor, as I mentioned, the districts that were affected were kind of already vulnerable districts for poverty. So they have to go through quite a difficult time, in my view. So how this connect to the climate challenges that we are facing is where I'm going to come up, because now we all know Sri Lanka and the region, the entire world is quite prone to a lot of climate shocks. And with the climate shocks, that means, as President Gotabaya Rajapaksa then mentioned, we have to avoid every climate shock to escalating it to a economic shock. Because if you allow it to, the climate shocks can happen, but the art of the game is that we stop it from extending it to economic crisis. Because if the economic crisis comes in, it can come in many other forms. It can be a debt crisis, it can be a balance of payment crisis. If those two takes place, there can be a political crisis and there can be a humanitarian crisis. So basically, a climate shock is not about rescuing and like the damage that it takes. It has basically the other crises that can follow up. So the art of the game is, how are we going to stop it? And the only way that we can stop it is through hard reforms and having economic fundamentals right. And unfortunately or fortunately, the Sri Lanka's way out from this crisis is economic growth. And we had about 5% economic growth. What I'm showing in this graph is, as you can see, even after the recovery, as you can see, our GDP is not recovered to 2018 level. Even after we achieved 4%, 5% growth in 2024-25, still we are below where we were in 2018. So that is why generally people say when you go through an economic crisis, you are going backwards for about, it's called the lost decade. You are going back towards about 10 years. If it extends, any sort of a crisis extends to a economic crisis, and that's what exactly has happened. So in moving forward, even for us to become resilient for a climate shock, while we can we can think about a lot of climate focused reforms, but it is also fundamentally important to have the economic fundamentals right, because only having the climate focus without having a proper focus on the economic fundamentals will pretty much open ourselves vulnerable for climate as well as economic shocks both. So that's where we have to be quite cautious, and the solution and the way that we have to look at it is mainly on the economic growth front. And again, as you can see, this is the from up until 15th of January, from 1st of January. Even as you can see, the tourism numbers, the dark blue color is the tourism arrival, again, which has been recovered. So that means even after a month, the tourist arrivals, of course, there's a conversation about the exact earnings from the tourism sector, but pretty much things have been recovered after the crisis compared to the previous crises that we have gone through. Even again, the remittances, as you can see, we had a record number of remittance collections in 2025, a historic record, and December it was the highest for the month for the 2025, of course, because of the crisis. People send a lot of money from overseas. So as a result, we are not bad as we were before. Even after the crisis is what the numbers indicate. And again, I must reiterate, it happened as a result of the somewhat right economic fundamentals that we had only for stability. But now the game is growth. And when we are moving to the growth, one thing that we cannot forget is also the debt, because with this crisis, as Manjula also alluded to in his initial introduction, people are, concerned about whether we are again after the crisis, are we going to go for are we in the path to another debt crisis? And there are different schools of thoughts on this. And even there have been prominent economists who have called for, like, again, sort of another debt restructuring process. So here what I have illustrated is where this debt is accumulating, because a lot of people think this debt is, even every time when there's a bond issuance taking place from the debt office, people are asking what these money being used. So as you can see in the pie chart into the left hand side, the money that we borrowed from 1999 to 2023, what you can see is where we borrowed most of our money is to pay the interest rates. Approximately about 50% of the money that we borrowed was to pay the interest rate. So why we have to borrow more and more is to continue the interest payments and also the debt servicing. So with the crisis, in my view, there is a risk. We cannot say everything is all right, because how this debt game works is, it works as long as things are stable. The moment the markets feel that things are not stable, starting from remittances, starting from tourists, starting from all other foreign sources, there will be challenges on the economy, because basically they don't send money and they will not do business with Sri Lanka if they feel that we as a country is not good for money. And that's exactly what happened during the crisis. Because if you recall, at that point also the then administration of the central bank and the key policymakers, they said, look, we get this amount of remittances, this number of tourists, but all those became estimates, because when you hit the crisis, basically everything starts, the wheels starts basically stop circulating. So as a result, in this case also, things are moving, the tourism numbers recovered, the remittances are flowing, because still we have some level of trust factor that things can be moved forward. To an extent, the IMF program and also the government's kind of action plan is helping, because they have also been quite pragmatic in their approach. So those has also been helping to an extent, but still our debt repayment is it's not challenging at the moment, but the multiple shocks can basically bring us a lot of challenges in moving forward. So again, as you can see, this is the plot of the IMF programs that we have been through up to 2023-24, and we are already on a new IMF program, which is a rapid financing instrument, additional to the extended fund facility we went through in 2022. So as you can see, we have been a continuous client of IMF every time when we face some level of crisis, and it could be a climate crisis, including a climate crisis. So what we need to do to be resilient for climate crises, which we don't know in which form that it could come. It could likely come as a drought, can be a flood, can be a tsunami, can be any form of a crisis. So every time when we face a crisis, since our macroeconomic fundamentals were bad, always we went back to the IMF multiple times. So what we need to do at the moment is to become resilient on even the climate front, that we have to make our fundamentals right. Now, here I am showing some indications of the challenges that we have. Now, with the climate challenges, now we had 2025 November, December was Ditwa. And as you recall, in 2016, we had a flood, and then which was followed up with a drought. Now, I am not saying there will be a drought in the next year, but as you can see, now if you are moving for more climate friendly or like more green kind of renewable energy direction with the climate challenges to bring down the carbon footprint, as you can see, what I have given is, if we were to electrification of our vehicle fleet, you can see the total electricity generation which is required, which is about 2,700 gigawatt hours to electrify our existing vehicle fleet. I'm not saying we are going to do it like overnight or over a weekend. It will be a gradual process. But as you can see, even if we were to electrify the vehicle fleet, there's quite a lot of electricity demand that has to be supplied, and which has to come on different forms. And even if you look at with the climate challenges, probably the atmospheric temperature is going to go up. That means we probably have to use more and more air conditions during the daytime. So it seems our energy demand is going to go up with the climate challenges. So what I have shown here on the right hand side is the penetration, the air conditioning penetration of our, like the countries in the region like Malaysia, Thailand, and Philippines, which are quite high compared to the air conditioning penetration of Sri Lanka. So now, if we are going to face for the climate challenges like the temperature increases in the atmosphere, so basically we have to spend more and more money to supply the electricity demand, because people likely will use more and more air conditions, and also they will consider using a lot of electric vehicles. So to do that, we have to create more and more energy in this climate context, while we have faced a massive Ditwa crisis on the other hand. So the way forward I would see is, there are a couple of ways that we can look at. So the context is, Sri Lanka has been going through multiple crises, and our economic fundamentals have been quite weak. This time we are somewhat okay, because after the crisis we have done certain reforms, but again it is quite evident that we are going to face more and more crises, mainly on the climate front. So what we have to do after Ditwa is basically build things better than it was before. So on that front, the reforms becomes quite evident. Now, for an example, let's look at as a result the railway, because most of our roads and the railway track has been damaged by Ditwa. So this is a golden opportunity if we were to consider of building the railway track better, because there was a time, actually literally it was like the entire railway was like on strike, because trains were literally not working. Now it's slowly working back, but if you look at the main line, one of the main lines toward the central provinces of Sri Lanka is still not operating in full capacity. So when we have a crisis like this, we can build things better than it was before, and we have some level of fiscal space at the moment. So that's something that we have to think about on an economic front. Second thing is, when a crisis in this stature like faces a country, the poorest of the poor are the most vulnerable. So we have to have our solid cash transfer system. We have Asasuma, we have different programs, but I think this becomes this reiterates the importance of digitization, which government has taken certain steps with the leadership of Dr. Hans. But the cash transfer system and digitization become a key solution for facing future climate challenges as well, because for identifying victims and identifying and protecting the poorest of the poor, the digitization and the cash transfer systems becomes quite evident for us to face similar level of crisis. The third one is, what I would like to say is to focus more on the tools like insurance. Now, when I say insurance, it doesn't mean that all Sri Lankans has to be insured, which is the best case scenario. But a lot of people underestimate what insurance does in terms of solving the information asymmetry. Because when you take an insurance, or like when there's insurance markets works, that those insurance companies basically invest more and more on identifying and getting information to identify risk factors. So when we can identify the risk factors through an insurance, actually we can price the risk factors better. Now, for an example, while the calendar in the Western province have been affected, I think, as per the reports, most of the insurance companies do not insure any property in that, like the valleys of Calania, because they know every time when there's heavy rains, that area is quite open for floods. So that gives a signal actually, if you're somewhat open, I mean, if you really want to be climate resistant and if you want to minimize the damage, probably you will not build any of your factories during that, I mean, in the areas of that valley, because you know, even if you face a crisis, that you cannot really claim an insurance. So the importance of insurance is that when it's there, you can identify the risk factors and you can price the risk, and as a result, that you can minimize the damage. For an example, after tsunami, there was a rule that the beach properties has to have a particular distance from the beach. But rather than, I mean, another way to look at it is that you price it quite high if you really want to build something as a beachfront, that you have to take an insurance, which is a very high premium. So as a result, over a period of time, on a financial point of view, the government can bring down the burden on their balance sheet. And people who really want to take a risk, that they can build it. The fourth point that I would like to bring out is economic growth is a priority. Now, with Ditwa impact, when we rebuild roads and railway and everything, there may be an impact on the economic growth as well, because ultimately the economy is working. But having said that, the growth requires a lot of other reforms. Mainly we call in the economic terms the factor market reforms, because we have to have land, adequate land for investments and for economic growth, and also the labor markets. Excuse me. So those factor market reforms are quite important. And again, while we think of the climate challenges, my final point is we have to think about the climate risk in a context of aging population, because as per the recent results by the Department of Census and Statistics, our population is aging, and in fact, it's contracting, because a lot of people are leaving the country, and the birth rate has come down. At the same time, our death rate has fairly increased. Still, we are on a positive territory, but with people leaving the country, our population is kind of shrinking, and it's an aging population, which is being indicated with the school admissions. I saw a lot of friends are posting pictures that their loving sons and daughters have been enrolled, and today is, I think, this is the first day at school. But the number of enrollments for grade 1 is quite lower compared to previous years, so it's less competitive, because this is the time that, children who born during the COVID time are getting to school now. So there's a kind of a dip in the population. So we have to think of that climate resistance on an aging population context as well. So to wrap up, we have been coming on multiple crises, and any climate shock, it could be drought, it could be a tsunami, anything can extend it to an economic crisis. And if it's an economic crisis, it can be multiple other crises, including humanitarian crisis. What we need to do is strengthen our economic fundamentals. To do that, we have to establish economic growth, and economic growth can only happen when you do economic reforms on the factor markets. And at the same time, in an economic crisis, a country like Sri Lanka, the poorest of the poor are going to get the worst impact. And to do that, we have to have a very, very solid social safety net. And that can only be taken place with proper digitization and having public digital infrastructure. And to avoid more and more climate risks that we are going to that are going to come on our way, one tool that we have to use is insurance, because that can solve some level of information asymmetry, and we can price the risk of a climate event that will provide less burden on the government's balance sheet, and it will help for us to stop heading to a massive economic crisis. With that, I hope I did not exceed my time quota. With that, I'll stop. And I'm delighted to hear my economic guru, Dr. Wijewardane. And in fact, it's an honor to share the forum with Dr. Wijewardane. Over to you, Manjula.
Thank you, Dhananath. You were well within your time. Absolutely perfect. And thanks so much for your great insights on the impact of the cyclone and how the government was able to effectively respond due to the strong buffers it had built post-economic crisis. You also addressed the challenges of economic growth and some of the challenges that we face on the debt front, and also made some interesting points on the economic challenges brought on by the climate change that is going on, and which is really the theme of this entire series of webinars. I also like the comments you made on the importance of insurance, being someone who has been associated with that industry in the past. So I will not try to summarize your entire presentation. I think it was very clear and succinct. So I will now go on to introduce our second speaker, who also needs very little introduction to any audience following developments on the economic front, Dr. W.A. Wijewardane, who is a former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, an independent economic analyst and public intellectual with advanced qualifications in economics and finance, and extensive experience in banking, education, research, and public discourse. He is also a prolific writer to newspapers and regular speaker at various forums on economic policy and related subjects. So over to you, Dr. Wijewardane.
Thank you very much, Manjula, and it has been a pleasure for me to speak to you after Dhananath Fernando, because Dhananath Fernando has taken us through a very detailed analysis of the Ditwa cyclone catastrophe and how it might affect the climatic issues of Sri Lanka. So my job has been made easier by him. I also have a little, some slides to share with you. And what I find is that, this particular webinar had been a very important one, and it had been received very well by your audience. So I will just, add something more to what Dhananath had already said. In my presentation, I will because the natural disasters are actually very frequent in Sri Lanka. If we take the history, Sri Lanka's recorded history, practically in every 4-year time period, there had been a disaster. And what we notice is that, people and the government and the policymakers are totally unprepared because they are unexpected. Because as a result, the damage to human beings as well as to the physical property had been much more than what normally you find in another country like, say, Australia or Japan, because those people are well prepared and they are pre-trained to face the natural disasters. because of this reason, Sri Lanka's all disasters, natural disasters that we had in the past maybe in the last 2 or 3 decades, what I find is that the damage that has been done to human beings, the casualties on the human side, and the destruction to physical property have been wide. Because if you take the most damaging disaster like the Asian tsunami of 2004, which affected the eastern and the southern coastal areas of Sri Lanka, the number of deaths had been recorded at around, say, 46,000 people, and the all the physical properties, capital items in that particular area had been completely destroyed. And then because we were not prepared, or we were not even anticipating a tsunami in Sri Lanka. But what matters is now in this present Ditwa cyclone, the number of deaths had been around, say, less than 700. And the number of people who have been displaced have been about, say, 2 million. The casualties on the side of the human beings, it's not easy for us to estimate the actual cost, because we cannot value the life of a human being, because how do we value it? I mean, if you go by the market doesn't give a value to human beings if that particular person cannot be employed fruitfully or gainfully in the market. But we know every human being has a value, and that value has to be estimated from a social and cultural point of view. So there we find it difficult to give the exact number to the casualties on the human side. But we can estimate the damage done to the physical infrastructure, and the World Bank has done it, and I'll go through it later in my presentation. And what we can do is only to look at how we can rehabilitate the physical infrastructure and not the casualties that we had on the human front side. So these are the reviving the dented, because the economy has been completely dented, as even Dhananath had presented it. When we are hit by a natural disaster of this magnitude and on this scale, naturally economic activities get slowed down, and as a result, the economic the total number of people and also the economic side get dented, and that dent is very whether that dent is deep or whether that dent is going over a longer period of time before it recovers. So those are the matters that we have to keep in our mind. For example, the dent that we got due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the central bank had estimated at that time the Sri Lanka would have a V-shaped economic recovery. That means, we have a dent immediately, but immediately there will be a recovery as well. We now find that the COVID-19 pandemic recovery is still going on. And also it has been going on not only in one V, combination of V's, which each V combine, each V attached to the other V. So therefore, we are still going through it. So in the same way, even though there is a little relief for us that the present Ditwa cyclone has caused some kind of a dent to the economic activities, it is still not totally understandable whether the total cost that we have incurred in the economy has been completely assessed and completely understood. So this is one of the problems that we are having. And most recent natural disaster is the November 2025 Ditwa cyclone, and it was predicted only 1 week ago. So as a result, neither the government nor the people of this country were not prepared for such a disaster. So as a result, it was totally unexpected. An unexpected disaster can cause the maximum damage, cause the maximum damage to the economy and also the human beings of the country. So it has happened here also. And so this one had affected the entire island, unlike the Asian tsunami of 2004, which affected the coastal areas. This one has affected the entire island. So as a result, it's an island-wide natural disaster. And in that natural disaster, practically every one of us have been affected by that. And specifically the small and medium enterprises in the country, which are scattered throughout the country, and also most of them are concentrated in the Western province, they are still trying to recover from the damage that has been done to them. So therefore, the government has so far not taken any action to rehabilitate them, nor have the banks done that. So we have to wait a longer time period to come for a recovery out of this present disaster. So country became non-functional for about 1 week, and after that only we became functional. Right now it seems that we have come back to normalcy, but of course, in my view, when we look at the rehabilitation cost and the efforts that we have to make in order to bring the country back to an advanced stage of technology, it takes a long period of time for Sri Lanka to attain that particular goal. So therefore, what we have attained so far is only a partial recovery. And the full recovery, it might take at least another 10-year time period for Sri Lanka to come back to an advanced level of economic recovery. So policymakers are picking up from the leftover threats of the cyclone, and that is another important matter because they were not prepared for this. They have not been pre-trained for that, and there was no any expectation as to how they should, respond to this type of cyclone. And in fact, they reacted to it angrily, and as a result, the total rehabilitation program has been stalled as a result of that. Because what we need is now, in addition to a national plan to bring Sri Lanka back to a high economic growth path, we need another plan to rehabilitate Sri Lanka's economy after it had been hit by this particular natural disaster. Because if it is hit by another disaster, then we are being pushed backward further. So therefore, it is essential for policymakers to come up with a new type of policy, new type of a plan to make Sri Lanka a recoverable economic institution. Then, as I said, we had actually 2022-23 economic crisis, and Dhananath also referred to this. We were slowly recovering. I mean, though many people are saying that we are on a very strong position, our recovery has been very slow, and also the recovery has also been partial. And that recovery was also due to Sri Lanka getting this extended fund facility from the International Monetary Fund, and also going through a reform program prescribed by the International Monetary Fund. Unfortunately for us, many people do not understand that the International Monetary Fund can help Sri Lanka to recover its nominal sector. What I mean is nominal sector is, the things that are measured in terms of money. For example, the price level, exchange rate, balance of payments, the budget, all these things are measured in terms of money. And also, they are a necessary requirement. The stability in all these key areas, nominal areas, is a necessary requirement for Sri Lanka to deliver prosperity with people. The prosperity comes from the development of the real sector. Real sector development comes from basically the development of the production of goods and services. The goods and services are, you can mention some goods and services. We can say rice and coconut and mangoes and clothes and internet services and banking services. Those are the things that actually contribute to the prosperity of the people. Now, that part is covered by the real economic growth of the country. That is, we are lagging. Even Dhananath had shown very beautifully the graph relating to the third quarter economic attainment. Our total production of the real goods and services in the third quarter 2025 had been below the attainment that we had in the third quarter of the best year 2018. So we are yet to reach that level. So that is because the IMF program has helped us to stabilize the nominal sector of the economy. And the nominal sector is measured in terms of money. And that will be a foundation for people to produce goods and services. And that part has not been taken care of. So that is why I said the worst economic crisis had been there. Partially, we have recovered from the economic crisis by stabilizing the nominal sector of the economy with the support of the International Monetary Fund. But what is now necessary is to produce the goods and services for which we have to allocate the resources for that purpose. And the Ditwa cyclone had completely hit the resource base of the country where we would be able to produce those goods and services. So real sector is still lagging with slow growth, and the growth of 5% now, of course, even the policymakers of the government and many of the economic analysts have been very jubilant about the 5% economic growth for Sri Lanka. But if you look at the post-independence average economic growth of the country has been between 4.5% to 5%. So what it means is, even if you don't do anything, this country's economy can grow by 5%. So in my view, 5% economic growth is a zero economic growth. If you want to have a positive economic growth to deliver prosperity to Sri Lanka, the economic growth should be more than 9%. So that part is still missing. Even from the economic crisis of 22-23, we had not been able to bring Sri Lanka's economic growth to the required level, and we had been simply following the historical growth, where the economic growth might take place even if we don't do anything. So therefore, instead of being jubilant about the 5% economic growth which we had in the third quarter of 2024, compared to the low economic growth in the same quarter in 2024, we must now think of developing Sri Lanka's economy to grow at a speedier rate. That rate should be, in my view, more than 9%. Otherwise, we will not be able to deliver prosperity to Sri Lanka. What we mean is to become a rich country in the world within a single generation. A single generation is normally 25 years time period. For us to do this miracle in 25 years, we have to grow at least at 9% per annum. That is one of the requirements. And we didn't have any plan to do it after the economic crisis of 22-23. Now we don't have a plan after the Ditwa cyclone. So that is where we stand today. So we have to increase the economic growth to this 9% and above. One of the important factors that we see in the Ditwa cyclone disaster is that we have got the support from the international community. Almost all our friends, India, China, and also those are the friends in the global south, and also the friends in the global north, like USA, Canada, UK, EU, Japan, and Australia. They had provided massive support to Sri Lanka because they believe that after Sri Lanka was hit by this 22-23 economic crisis, and after we had gone again along with the IMF policy program, they think that Sri Lanka can become a country of worth through these economic reforms. So because of that reason, when the country was hit by a temporary cyclone disaster, those countries had been providing massive economic support to Sri Lanka, unlike the time that we had the Asian tsunami in 2004. In the Asian tsunami, we didn't have that much of support from the rest of the world. We got some support, but the magnitude of the support that we got was not as high as the support that we are getting from the international community today. At the same time, we have the international lending institutions, multilateral institutions like IMF, World Bank, and ADB. They are also providing quick relief to Sri Lanka in terms of foreign exchange. Within about 2 weeks' time, the International Monetary Fund had approved the rapid financing facility of $200 million, which has come in handy for the government of Sri Lanka to finance the required foreign exchange requirements needed for the rehabilitation of the economy. So this is a very important thing, and a similar gesture had been expressed by ADB as well as the World Bank. So these are some plus points that we are having from the international side. Then the Sri Lankan corporate sector has also been, contributing massively to the disaster recovery fund that had been created by the government of Sri Lanka. That is also one thing that I have noted for the first time in my life, because most of these corporates had been contributing more than 25 million, some even 50 million, some 100 million, and they had been contributing to this fund, and the fund is swelling every day. But those are rupee money. So the government will have rupees. At the same time, the government will get foreign exchange from the treasury side. So therefore, we are in a better wicket. We are in a better wicket to back the disaster recovery program. So this is a very important thing that we have to keep in our mind. And on the fiscal side, this was referred to by Dhananath also. One important factor is that we have some buffer left in the treasury, which is not actually a recent development. It is a development that had started from 2023 after Ranil Wickremesinghe Singh administration took power. And what they did was they had suspended the repayment of debt, and also they had not spent the entire amount which had been allocated for financing the capital expenditure of the government. For example, in 23, it was about, say, of the total amount allocated was some 1.3 trillion, but amount spent was about, say, 500 billion. 24 also the same, and 25 was the same. So there was an under expenditure on the capital side, and the non-payment of the debt in those 3 years had helped the government of Sri Lanka to accumulate some surplus in the banking sector. Now, this particular surplus is nothing but the balance in the consolidated fund of the treasury. Now, everybody knows that in terms of Sri Lanka's constitution, all monies that are received by the central government should be credited to a consolidated fund. All the monies that are to be spent out of by the Sri Lanka government should be debited to the consolidated fund. So the consolidated fund is the main fund available to the general treasury to spend money. So when we see that all the money is to be received by the government of Sri Lanka, it includes the tax revenue, it includes the grants that the government has got, it includes the profits that it has got the public enterprises, and also it includes the proceeds of the loans that it has raised. So the monies that are to be paid out to the consolidated fund are the normal consumption expenditure of the government, which we call the recurrent expenditure. Then we have the physical capital expenditure. Then we have the third part, very important thing, the repayment of the principal of the loans that are maturing in the particular year. Now, this is where the government had been able to generate a surplus, because before 2022, the consolidated fund had always been overdrawn. It had been overdrawn to the extent of about, say, 1 trillion Sri Lanka rupees in the previous years. But after the 2022, because of the postponement of the repayment of the debt, and also the underutilization of the expenditure, and supported by the new tax revenue that has come from the tax reforms that have been introduced by the government has been able to accumulate a surplus in the consolidated fund, which is available in the Bank of Ceylon, in the government's account in the Bank of Ceylon. So that particular amount is actually money which the government has to spend when the government starts repaying public debt. But of course, it is there. It has been available there for use by the government for the Ditwa cyclone rehabilitation program, and that particular amount will simply vanish once the government starts, repaying public debt. That is the biggest problem we are having. So out of this 1.3 trillion surplus money which the Bank of Ceylon, 500 billion had already been allocated under supplementary estimate to finance the rehabilitation program in 2025. The money had already been paid to the spending unit, and the spending units are now keeping this money to spend during the year 2026 and in the future under the rehabilitation program. Since there is no any concrete plan for the rehabilitation, money is still waiting to be spent by this institution. So what I find is that the surplus money is there. That surplus money has been a temporary occurrence in the consolidated fund. Once Sri Lanka starts repaying public debt, the principal amount has to be charged to the consolidated fund. Once they start charging to the consolidated fund, the surplus will become actually a deficit, and the consolidated fund will be overdrawn as before. But for the time being, the government has been able to use the surplus in the consolidated fund to finance the recovery program. So this money was available immediately. There is no cash shortage right now for the government because the money is in cash form with the Bank of Ceylon. So there is no necessity for the government to issue treasury bills or treasury bonds to raise cash to finance the recovery program. It is only a matter of debiting the account in the Bank of Ceylon and crediting the spending agencies of the government so that they will start spending. Right now, 500 billion has been taken out. They are available with the spending units of the government, and they are waiting for a concrete plan to spend that money. The money is now lying idle with the spending units rather than being spent by the government for the recovery program. So this is where we stand as at the beginning of 2026. So the damage estimates have been done by the World Grant Group under the Global Rapid Post-Disaster Damage Estimation. They call it GRADE, by using its standard built-in model and with available data. Now, this is a very important thing because these are called large data models, which they have in their computer system. What is necessary for them is to put the data into the model so that they will be able to come up with a reasonable initial estimate of the damage. One thing we have to keep in our mind is that the present damage has been done only in respect of the physical property, not for the human beings. So far we don't know the amount of cost that we have incurred in terms of the loss of human lives and the displacement of the people, and also the loss of occupation for the single headed families headed by women, and also the increase in the poverty line. That human side part has not been part of the estimates done by the World Bank. But they have done, by using their large data model, they have made an initial estimate. And one important thing we have to keep in our mind is the data that they have fed to the model are the historical costs, and it's not the replacement cost. For example, if you take the iron bridge, which is known as the Yakage Palama in Wijewardane, for the railway department, that had been destroyed, and it had been constructed by the railway department during the colonial times. But if you want to reconstruct it now, the costs are enormous, and that particular cost have not been taken into account when they make the cost estimate, the new cost estimate. Similarly, the buildings are also the same thing. But most of the buildings that have been damaged, the government building, the business buildings, and all these buildings have been constructed not as smart buildings. Those buildings have been constructed under the normal condition. And once, if you want to replace them, it will be a big problem for Sri Lanka to do that, and the cost must be enormous. So that is why some people have estimated the total loss to the physical capital of Sri Lanka is more than say 50, not the 4 billion US dollars, it's more than 15 billion US dollars. So that is why some of the economists have asked Sri Lanka to do a fresh debt renegotiation so that we may be able to postpone the repayment of the debt, and we can keep the surplus in the government treasury with the Bank of Ceylon for a longer period than what we have. Otherwise, the entire surplus that we have will vanish after 2027 when the government starts repaying its public debt. So the initial cost at historical cost has been put at 4.1 billion, and with available, but when we want to make a re-estimate by using the replacement cost, that will be around 15 billion and more. So the infrastructure or the human capital portfolio of the country. For the roads, bridges, railways, and water, this is the breakdown of the 4.1 billion. At historical cost, 1.7 billion for roads, bridges, railways, and water supply network. Residential buildings and their contents, what we have inside buildings, 985 million. Agriculture, paddy, vegetable crops, subsistence farming, maize, livestock, and infrastructure, 814 million. Non-residential buildings, schools, healthcare facilities, businesses, large industrial facilities, and factories, 562 billion. Remember, they are at historical cost and not at the replacement cost. So the report has, said the damage has been, with respect to damage, the report has said the assessment underscores how pre-existing socio-economic vulnerabilities, including poverty, limited access to services, and exposure to climate risk, are likely to amplify the cyclone's impacts and slow recovery, particularly for women, children, older persons, and female-headed households. Targeted recovery efforts will be essential to ensure support reaches the most at-risk communities. Now, what it means is, whatever the plan the government is going to do, the rehabilitation of the infrastructure should cover not only that, it should cover a wider area where we would be covering the socio-economic factors, the human factors, and also the development of the economy. Now, in this sense, already we know that we cannot assess the value of the loss, the value of the lost life. We cannot assess the value of the displaced life, and that has to be done anew, and we have to retrain those people who have been displaced now in order to undertake new business activities. So thus deep-rooted vulnerabilities in the hardest hit districts have become more vulnerable, needing immediate attention by the government to eliminate such vulnerabilities and help the affected communities to
mainstream economic activities. Now, this is what we needed. So the good side is that it's a creative, now we all know that whatever the destruction that happens to any economy, following the Joseph Schumpeter, the Austrian American economist who wrote in 1942, he called it creative destruction. And as a result, we are now in a position to rebuild in a new form. For example, when the central bank was hit by the LTT bomb in 1996, it was a destruction to the central bank's physical property. It completely destroyed the central bank's computer system. But we were able to rebuild a smart building. We were able to renew the computer system. We were able to retrain the staff. And therefore, that particular destruction gave an opportunity to be creative. The same thing happens in this case also. When the government decides on the rehabilitation plan for the physical infrastructure, and also when the government decides on the rehabilitation plan, redevelopment plan of the human capital factor, it should be on modern lines, not in the old lines. For example, when you rebuild the schools, it's not the same old school building that has to be brought in. It should be a smart school building. When you want to provide support to the school children, it should be the smart way that they should learn their studies. And the teachers will have to be retrained in order to deliver those services. The government servants will have to be retrained in order to use the new technology. So these are important things that we have to keep in our mind. But of course, it has given a good opportunity, and that particular opportunity has been used by us. In that sense, the present 500 billion that has been allocated in say supplementary estimate is nothing. It will vanish simply, and if you are trying to rebuild it on the same old lines, we are losing a very valuable, important opportunity for us. So the engineering weakness and vulnerable areas have been highlighted because most of the dams that had been, breached, there had been engineering difficulties, and that has to be created. The roads have been constructed not on modern lines in the past, and they have to be now redone on modern lines. So therefore, there's a need for addressing vulnerabilities in socio-economic factors has come out. Sri Lanka can restart with a new life if proper planning is made. So what I suggest here is that presently the government has not undertaken this wider aspect of rehabilitating Sri Lanka's economy after the Titwa cyclone. It is a must that the government will have to do it properly, covering not only the physical infrastructure, but also the human side of the disaster as well. That's the end of my presentation, and I am available for any questions to clarify the points that I have raised here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Wijewardane. Thank you very much for keeping well within the time, and also for that insightful presentation, focusing on the need to fully understand and assess the total impact of the disaster. I think you kind of implied that the scale of the disaster is far more than what we are currently observing. And you also expressed the view that the recovery has been slow and mainly focusing on nominal variables, not the real sector, which you feel is where growth is required to uplift living standards. And you also acknowledge, like Dhananath did, that fiscal space has been built over the last few years that has helped the government to counter the impact. But you are advocating a sort of more holistic approach to recovery, not limited to economic factors, but going beyond that. So that is, in a nutshell, some of the key points that you raised. And so now that I think both speakers have kept well within the time allotted to them, we have a little bit more time for questions and answers, which I think I'm happy about, because already we have received quite a few questions on the chat box and on the Q&A box. So please keep posting more questions. And we will now move on to the Q&A session. But before coming to some of the audience questions, please let me begin with a couple of questions I would like to pose to the two speakers. First of all, Dhananath, do you think the impact on livelihoods of people, particularly in the agricultural and SME sectors, will have an adverse impact on consumer demand across the board, thereby impacting other sectors as well, such as manufacturing and servicing? I mean, even though they have not been hit very strongly from the supply side, whether they will see some demand side impact as the year progresses. What do you think about that?
Thanks, Manjula. So yes, I think there will be definitely a shock on that front, because the challenge is, to simplify things, someone's expenditure is someone's income. There are two sides. I think Dr. Wijewardane brought out an important point on the grade analysis by the World Bank. So this cost has been done based on the previous, the initial value, not the current value. So if we were to build it, there will be some expenditure that is coming from the government. So that can actually, in a way, induce the spending capacity. But given the impact overall on the agricultural sector and the other sectors, when they basically don't operate at the same scale, the rest of the people who are depending on that ecosystem will be definitely affected. And that's how the economic impact basically, in a way, distilled down to a larger population. So that challenge is there in my view. And that's why I think it's important that, again, to reiterate on the growth narrative, to really produce the real goods, not the nominal goods. Ultimately, you have to produce many number of kilograms of rice, mangoes, bananas, everything in this context. And with probably another strategy to think about it is also whether with these climate challenges, I'm not saying to leave agriculture, but how feasible is our agriculture in coming forward at the same time? Because it seems that this is going to be a continuous, because there can be a drought, there can be likely water related issues. So we have to think about it, because the next crisis will come before we recover from this crisis. And that's what exactly has been happening.
Thanks, Dhananath. And as you know, like the contribution to the GDP is now quite low, relatively speaking, from the agriculture sector, but you still have a large number of the population employed, which itself is indicative of the low productivity in that sector. So let me pose this question to you, Dr. Wijewardane. Now, as you both said, there is a significant reconstruction required to rebuild the damaged infrastructure. I mean, whether it's roads or bridges or railways, a lot of rebuilding is required. Now, even if we mobilize adequate financial resources, do you feel we have enough human capital and institutional capacity to get the job done within a reasonable time frame? What do you think?
The short answer to your question, Manjula, is no. Because the Sri Lanka doesn't have enough foreign exchange, because the entirety of the rehabilitation program of the physical capital infrastructure will depend on the foreign exchange, because it has to be done by using imported raw material, imported items. So we don't have enough foreign exchange to do that, because our present the reserves, the official reserve that we have, had been overestimated by the central bank by adding the non-usable soft facility from the People's Bank of China, amounting about $1.5 million. And when we take it out, the usable foreign exchange resource is about $5 million. And when we start repaying our foreign debt, we will not have enough foreign exchange to utilize. So financing capacity is also limited, even though, and also we cannot print money anymore, as we had done in the past. The government cannot print money and finance it. The government has to raise money by borrowing from the domestic market or by taxing people more. And everybody knows that the people in Sri Lanka are paying taxes, very high taxes, and therefore there will be resistance from the taxpayers to pay more taxes to recover this, to finance the recovery program. So we have a foreign exchange problem on that one side, and we have the domestic financing problem on the other side. And that is where we are actually facing. And therefore, that is why I said, that's why some of these, world economists have asked the government of Sri Lanka to renegotiate the debt suspension program and also postpone the debt repayment to another period. And of course, what they are suggesting is that we should have a haircut of about, say, 50% of the outstanding debt in order to enable Sri Lanka to provide the necessary funding for the rehabilitation program.
Thanks, Dr. Wijewardane. So let me now move on to some of the questions that the audience has raised, because a lot of questions are flowing in. And I must also comment that we have about 264 participants right now on this webinar. So that's quite a good number to have with us at this point in time. So let's try to respond to some of the questions that they are raising. Okay, the first one, maybe I'll put this to Dhananath. As an entrepreneur, what kind of strategies should I follow to achieve stability of my business under climate impact? So somebody wants to know, like, as an entrepreneur, how he or she should respond.
Quite depending also on the type of business that you are in. And it's sometimes very difficult to give a very specific answer to like a business, but overall businesses generally, first of all, understand the climate issues are going to be the natural cause of event, because generally how Sri Lankans think is they think the climate issue or like a crisis as a completely isolated event. But in our case, crisis is like day-to-day operation if you look at the past 8 to 10 years. So better to be budget for that, prepared for that, and be prepared for a rainy day. That's number one. Number two is, as I mentioned, think of the climate risk in your business. As a result, I mean, there's quite actually reasonable information available on areas that is getting affected by flood, so on and so forth. I'm not saying we can predict everything, but it's obvious that we are more prone to climate risk from probably from water related issues. It could be a tsunami, it could be flood. Floods are quite common, and even the World Bank report has detailed out like how many floods that has been coming for like probably like for the last 30-40 years. So so think on that aspect is one way to think about it. The second thing is generally the government's response has also been like you offer a moratorium for the businesses. And that has been probably the easiest, or like, and also the businesses has also been pretty much depending on the moratorium. And keeping those things in mind is something to think about. At the same time, the climate risk can also be an opportunity on the other side, on a business point of view, because every crisis is an opportunity. So if we can capitalize on resistance, that can also be a competitive advantage. But I don't have any specific insights because I don't know the kind of business, type of business. But overall, thinking on that framework is something that we can think about.
Thanks, Dhananath. To that, maybe I might add that perhaps you could look at the adequacy of insurance that you have taken or your business, whatever the business, to make sure that there's sort of adequate coverage on that front, because a lot of people tend to neglect that aspect, and only when some disaster strikes that people realize the value of having some insurance cover. With regard to moratoriums, of course, I mean, I feel my personal view is that then you are basically getting one sector to subsidize another, right? Because it's going to sort of put a burden on the financial sector. So something we need to balance out. So let me put a question to Dr. Wijewardane again, picking from the audience questions. How can the Ministry of Finance, within the constraints of the IMF program, ensure that the Rebuilding Sri Lanka Fund is used effectively to deliver urgent relief, restore production and trade capacity, and build long-term economic resilience without compromising fiscal sustainability? So can the Rebuilding Sri Lanka Fund be used as a kind of a primary source of funding to support the rebuilding effort?
Well, Manjula, the rebuilding fund is completely outside the fiscal control of the treasury. As I told you, in terms of Sri Lanka's constitution, all receipts to the government will have to be credited to the consolidated fund, or payments out of the government will have to be debited to the consolidated fund. And that we do every year by passing a bill called the Appropriation Act in Parliament immediately after the budget. This particular fund that has been established has so far not got the parliamentary approval. So therefore, it is outside the control of the treasury, outside the control of the IMF, outside everything. So that is why it is being managed by a team of high-powered private sector entrepreneurs plus 2 or 3 government servants, and they are the custodians of the particular fund, and therefore it is outside. Therefore, it doesn't interfere with the IMF program right now. But what is being demanded by many who agitate for governance, good governance, who agitate for accountability in financing, is that this has to be brought within the fiscal measures of the General Treasury. It has to be created in terms of a new act passed by Parliament with suitable governance provisions, suitable accountability provisions. Because right now we don't know. I mean, if all these high-powered private sector entrepreneurs, how will they use it, how they will spend that money, nobody knows. So therefore, right now, Manjula, there is no any conflict with the IMF or conflict with the Parliament, because it's outside. It's just like the President's Fund. So just like the President's Fund that was created by Wijewardane. So it is outside. So it has to be brought into the fiscal sector by getting a Parliament to enact a new law to provide the rules and the accountability principles and how the money should be used.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. And also, I think the scale is of a different magnitude, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the scale of the disaster and the economic impact, right? And what we have so far got into this Rebuilding Sri Lanka Fund is like nowhere near that extent of funds required. So obviously, I mean, maybe it can be used for certain purposes, but definitely we'll have to fall back on the budget and other sources of funding. So yeah, let me quickly go through a few more questions. This I'll put to you, Dhananath. From your experience, what role can young professionals play in supporting the economic recovery and resilience after a disaster? Interesting question. Somebody who wants to, put his or hand up and asking, okay, what can we do?
Not the best advice, but not to leave the country. I mean, you have the choice to leave because we are kind of shortage of people who are skillful. But no, on a more serious note, it is contributing. I mean, what we do is what we saw in Sri Lankans. Pretty much the genetics is when there's a crisis, there's an immediate aftermath. Like you basically donate and you basically do the immediate kind of caretaking by even donating the little that you have. I think a lot of young people volunteering and all that which is very good because that's important as a country. That's our culture. But afterwards, it is two things on a more broad aspect. One is on standing for this economic kind of reforms is one important thing, because otherwise, because these issues are quite broad issues, like just we donating something which is good, but the impact that we can create at a national level is minimal. I think we all have to admit that. Because the issues are quite broader and it's only can come through a series of coordinated reforms is where we can see certain results. And the important thing is to standing for those changes. That's, I would say, number one. Number two is, I think now, I mean, even there was a time that even the young people were also looking for a lot of government jobs. I think young professionals now no longer looking at that, which is good. But again, trying to contribute back to the economy, I mean, to produce the real goods is the second thing that you can do. The third thing is also creating the opinion and the narrative, because you need to speak about the right things and what you need to do, because it's a social media era. Sometimes even the smaller opinions are also matter. But individually, you have to do well, facing the challenges, creating job opportunities. Those are the common things that you can do. Because as an individual, in my view, these are quite large issues, which requires a little coordinated effort when it comes to coming out from this crisis. And that's the complication of these issues as well, because you cannot really, one person can jump and solve it. I mean, if it is possible, probably there'll be many who could do that. It's not easy because it's a collective effort. Everyone has to do their role if we were to come out, and there has to be some level of coordination is required for that to take place.
Thanks, Dhananath. I think that's very useful advice coming from a young professional yourself. Maybe not so young, but but much younger than the two of us here on this panel. So let me now raise this question from Dr. Wijewardane. Now, I think it was you who talked about achieving 9% economic growth. So this question is, in order to reach over 9% economic growth, what are the required savings and investment rates in the country? And is it possible with the current low level of savings and investments? Obviously not possible with the current levels, but what kind of challenge you see on that front, Dr. Wijewardane?
Well, present level of savings in Sri Lanka is not sufficient to meet this 9% economic growth. It has to be increased. And those savings should come both from the government sector and the private sector, and people like us, private sector. In the case of the government sector, government had been concentrating under the IMF program on the primary balance, which is irrelevant in this matter. What matters to the government in this sense is the generation of a surplus in the revenue account. That is the total revenue of the government minus the total consumption expense the government should have a surplus. Right now, and also as the government has forecasted for the next few years, it's in deficit. What it means is the government sector is actually eating up the savings of the private people. So that is where the fiscal policy will have to be regenerated and reformed to generate a surplus in the revenue account rather than concentrating on the irrelevant primary account here, and also contribute to the total savings of the country. The private sector savings will have to be done in terms of the market mechanism, and people will have to consume less and save more. That part has to be done by providing them a good real rate of return on their investment. And that part has to be done by the central bank through its interest rate policy. But I find that the interest rates are being kept at a stagnant position by the central bank because there's a pressure from the government to reduce it, and the central bank doesn't want to reduce it, nor does the central bank want to increase it. So therefore, they are keeping it stagnant, and they are therefore the total incentive package that we have given to the savers has been completely eroded due to the high cost of living in the country. Third one is to raise it, even with the present available level of savings and investment, we have to increase the productivity. Productivity has to be increased across the economy, agriculture, industry, services, all the places. Productivity has to be increased so that you will be able to producing more by using a given amount of inputs. And that part has to be done through a general national productivity program. That has to be done by the government, and so far it has not touched this particular important aspect. Third one is that the education has to be reformed, not the school education. The government is very happy about reforming the school education, even then the grade 1 education, and it had been there's a big fanfare today that the government has introduced the grade 1 education reform, but that also does not cover the school education. What is necessary is the education at the high level. What we mean by education is the human capital development. And if you go by the Government Finance Statistics Manual issued by the International Monetary Fund, and also the System of National Accounts Manual issued by the UNDP, United Nations System, education is any expenditure done by a society, not only the government, society, to improve the learning capacity of the population. That learning capacity of the population includes us also. So what it means is that naturally there should be a national effort to improve the education knowledge base of Sri Lankans. Specifically, we have to look at the digital literacy of Sri Lankans, not necessarily the literacy rate that we are presently calculating. Digital literacy has to be increased, that there's a fear of digital things by Sri Lankans. So therefore, educational reforms should be undertaken across the economy, covering all sectors, schools, universities, technical colleges, and the wider society, and including even the old people like us. So those are the things that they have to do in order to attain this high economic growth of 9%, given the present level of low amount of savings as well as low amount of investments.
Thanks, Dr. Wijewardane. So we can take another 2 or 3 questions. Since we started a little bit late, I believe we can go on till maybe about 9, 10 or so. Okay, let's read one more question. This one I'll put to you, Dhananath. From our current perspective and in light of the country's slow economic growth, which sectors offer the most favorable investment opportunities that can also support economic growth?
This is also kind of a common question that we get. I mean, we can look at certain sectors based on the credit growth and all that. But recently, I listened to Professor Ricardo Hausman from Harvard, and in fact, he said something interesting. He said the next growth industries probably are not even born now for the next 5-10 years. because as we know, things are changing at a rapid pace. It doesn't mean that we should not like think about or do anything about it, but in a dynamic environment, things are changing at a rapid pace, and that's the reality. So, I mean, in terms of credit growth, I think there's, I mean, always opportunities for tourism and services sector, the shipping. I think those industries are good, but I am cautious on like at a public policy level to say that this industry do this industry not to do this. And the same problem can happen what Manjula earlier mentioned. It's like cross-subsidizing one from one sector to the other sector that will completely affect the rest of the sectors which even we don't think about. But on an overall view, I would say keep the stability. I think the industries will automatically in the sense it will come up because I think the entrepreneurs are quite smart that they will cater because certain needs we really do not know. And if you are serious about growth, it is a changing environment. And look at what happens, like even on the geopolitical front, you really cannot predict. It has really become a very, very unpredictable territory. And even in that territory, there will be some innovations that can take place. And it is better to keep our eyes open rather than going particularly on selected ones, is my broader view. But if you really want to look at like where it is growing, of course, there are certain things can be predicted. With an aging population, probably the products for the aging population may have a demand. And you can also see like some industries with the aging population will have a negative impact. So of course, there can always be things can be think through, but it all depends on how the rest of the resources are allocated in the economy.
Thanks, Dhananath. Let's try to take up at least two more questions. Dr. Wijewardane, if you can also give a brief answer to this. What is the impact on the SME sector? I believe we are talking about the impact of the cyclone. And if there are any challenges, what are the solutions suggested?
Well, the impact on the SME sector is massive because Sri Lanka's, we take the total GDP of the country, about 55 to 60% of the output is contributed by the SME sector. So therefore, it's a very important sector. And also, it's a sector which employs the largest number of workers also. And they had been very badly affected by the cyclone, Dikta cyclone. And some of these enterprises are they are still recovering and they have not recovered yet. And what is to be done is that there must be a separate arm in the government to handle the issues faced by the SME sector, which in my view are not the financial issues, they are actually technical issues. Because most of these people are producing goods that cannot be exported to other countries. Because when we look at the initial phase of the development of a country like Hong Kong or Taiwan or Singapore, what happened was most of the exports came from the small SME sectors and not from the big companies. So likewise in Sri Lanka also, if we want to improve our export earnings, we have to develop the SME sector. We have to connect the SME sector to the rest of the world. To do that, they must be provided with the modern technology. And that modern technology provision should be done by a separate arm of the government. And it's not just lip service that we presently do for the SME sector. We have to have a separate mechanism to provide technology, and for that purpose, all the universities in Sri Lanka now have faculties of technology, and we have about 100 technical colleges in the country. And all these institutions will have to be geared to produce new technology that is of use to produce goods and services for the export of the rest of the world. Then we have to connect these small exporters to big exporters in the country. And as a result, they will become one day, they also become big exporters one day. So SME sector has to be separately tackled, and presently what is happening is that those people are asking for financial relief, which is actually one aspect of the problems that they are facing. The main problem they are facing is the low productivity, low quality of the goods that they produce, and the inability to export those goods to the rest of the world. In fact, some of these agricultural firms cannot meet even the hygienic requirements that have been imposed by the developed countries. And those are important things that we have to, inculcate in their minds. And that has to come from a separate arm of the government.
Thanks, Dr. Wijewardane. So, as a final question, I thought I'll pick up this issue about three-wheeler drivers because several members in the audience seem to be perturbed about the fact that we have quite a large number of the population engaged as three-wheel drivers and food delivery people. And also somebody has observed that they are just parked all day idling, and whether that labor can be sort of transitioned into an area like agriculture where we have a need to produce real goods. Maybe I'll just ask for comments from both of you, and I'll add my own perspective also to this, being the final question. What I feel is that, I mean, if these people are productively engaged, then it's fine. I mean, I think the food delivery guys are providing a useful service, and also maybe in some areas the three-wheeler drivers do, which as long as they are adding value in one way or the other, that's fine. But of course, if there are lots of people, there's an excess, then definitely that is something that needs to be addressed. So can I have a quick view on this, maybe from Dhananath first and Dr. Wijewardane?
So I'll probably, with my answer, I'll become quite unpopular for saying this. No, on the three-wheeler issue, I'll put it in this way. I know there's quite a lot of idling that is happening, but in my view, with the platform companies or the network companies entering, I think that is no longer. I mean, it is there, but it is quite. That productivity improvement has been happening. But having said that, I think the three-wheeler issue, it's a symptom of the public transport issue that we have. I mean, when you have the proper public transport, there'll be no need for pretty much the three-wheelers at this scale. But having said that, if you look at the stock market, what's happening to the pygmy stock, and I think they have released their third quarter finances. In their statement, what they have said was the three-wheeler drivers' earnings have gone up by about 14%, if I remember right. And I think we hosted Zulfa in one of our sessions. What he said was the guys who are in the platform companies, like I think there's a new player, Helago, Uber, Pickme. I think their earnings are approximately, if I remember right, about 50-60% higher than a guy without a meter or like without on a platform. So that means basically, I think economic term, basically they are like the matching markets. It's like the matrimonial markets, like you are matching with the demand and supply through a platform, which makes them productive. I mean, efficiency wise it's good, but it's as I mentioned, it's a byproduct of a broader public transport issue. So in my view, if you want to resolve the three-wheeler problem, probably we have to address the public transport issue, and the three-wheeler problem will pretty much go away. I'm not saying it will go away automatically, but when you work on the fundamentals, it's more a byproduct rather than the main product. And if we try to, because probably the three-wheeler guys, I mean, they are in that business because it is probably profitable and better than the other options which is available at the moment. But I understand there's quite a lot of labor and productivity that is taking place. But having said that, we should not also forget some of the finance companies are built completely at the back of a three-wheeler. Their finance facilities, everything is provided for the three-wheeler market. So there are all sorts of things there. But in my view, we have to solve the public transport issue to solve out the three-wheeler problem, if it is a problem. At the moment, in my view, they are providing quite a valuable service given the quite a precarious situation of our public transport system.
You're spot on, Dhananath. I think definitely it's a manifestation of a different problem, isn't it? I mean, it's due to the poor quality of the public transport system that this whole three-wheeler operation has come in kind of more like a substitute. Dr. Wijewardane, any quick thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Well, of course, the three-wheeler problem, the three-wheelers were a necessity at a certain point in economic development of Sri Lanka. They had been very popular in Thailand about, say, 25 years ago, very popular in Malaysia in the same way, popular in most of the cities in India, but no more. That is because, as Dhananath has said, in those countries, the transport system had been developed to accommodate the requirements of the commuters. And in Sri Lanka, that has not been done. Second one is that what has happened here is that since those three-wheeler drivers cannot find another occupation, because those people are all people who have been, school dropouts. They have been, left or students from the educational system, and therefore they cannot do any other job than, riding a three-wheeler and trying to pick up passengers and earn some income. And for that purpose, the finance companies also have been supporting them because they had provided good, financing facility for them to do that. And now what we find is that as human capital units, those people have no any growth. They will start as a three-wheeler driver, they will die also as a three-wheeler driver with the same level of income. Usually what we must see in any economy, in any driving economy, any dynamic economy, that we start as a micro entrepreneur, then you go into a small entrepreneur, then medium-sized entrepreneur, then the large-sized entrepreneur. Therefore, there's the growth. But here there's no growth. They join as three-wheeler drivers and they die also as a three-wheeler drivers. So therefore, there is no any growth facility for them. What is needed right now is, since Sri Lanka's economy is also moving forward, there is this the cab service that has been offered by three main cab service providers in the country, and they are also enlisted in the service of the three-wheelers. And when people move on to those cab services, the three-wheelers will not get their orders, and as a result, they will have a natural death. So what we have to do as a society is to retrain them, to help them to get into some other areas of the mainstream in the economy. So that has to be done immediately as a priority in Sri Lanka.
Thanks, Dr. Wijewardane. And also, actually, while dealing with the three-wheeler issue, you also touched on another important point that, these small enterprises cannot remain as small enterprises forever, isn't it? I mean, they have to, the small enterprises must become medium enterprises and then large. I mean, that is the progression that you want to see in the economy if the economy itself were to grow. I think we have exhausted our time, and I am not going to try and summarize. We had a lot of very fruitful discussion. And I think basically the message that I think you can get from it, from this whole discussion, is that the cyclone Ditwa, I mean, while it has caused so much of damage, it has also given us an opportunity to relook at some of the areas in the economy that need to be developed and looked at with a different perspective. So I think so that is one of the maybe silver linings that have come with the disaster. And so with that thought, I think I will conclude the Q&A. But please remain on the meeting for Umayangana to do the final wrap up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Manjula and Silva, for driving that interesting discussion. And also, I would like to thank Mr. Dhananath, Fernando, and also Dr. W. Wijewardane for sharing your valuable insights. And I believe that the perspectives that you shared were truly an eye-opener to see how we can rebuild as a country and also to strengthen the resilience after natural disasters like this. So once again, I would like to thank Mr. Manjula Silva as well for moderating the session and for expertly guiding the discussion. And we are grateful that we also had a lot of time for the Q&A. And I think we were able to address many of the questions raised by the participants as well. So thank you for that. And I think today's webinar was all about, letting us know that it's high time that Sri Lanka as a nation taking proactive measures and also reactive measures after unfortunate disasters like Ditwa, and also to take proactive measures before another disaster of this magnitude occurs. So thank you very much for all the insights that you have provided. And also I would like to thank all the participants for taking part in the discussion today. And as you can see on the screen, the feedback form is visible for you all now. Please fill the feedback form, as we will be issuing the certificates based on the details that you would mention in this feedback form. So please take some time to fill this. And also I would like to specially thank the National Science Foundation of Sri Lanka, the Association of Commonwealth Universities, and the National Research Council for their extensive support in promoting this national webinar series that we are conducting at SLTC for sharing with a wider audience. So thank you very much for those institutes as well. And with that, I would also like to invite the participants to join with the next webinar, which will be held on 11th of February from 7 to 9 p.m. via Zoom. And it will feature a session on climate change, risks and adaptation, conducted by Professor Hemanta Lalit Radapaksha and Dr. Lumida Gunawardana. And also it will be moderated by Dr. K.D. Charita Disanayaka. So with that, we can now officially conclude the second webinar. Thank you very much, Mr. Manjula Silva, Mr. Dhananath, and Dr. Wijewardane for joining with the fruitful discussion. And we hope that you will all stay connected with the other series of the webinars. Thank you very much and have a pleasant evening. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.